Rouse's Markets is voted best grocery store in New Orleans, best grocery store in Baton Rouge, Mississippi, Gulf Coast, Thibodeau, Houma, Hammond, Lake Charles, Mobile, year after year. Thank you for choosing us best grocery store on the Gulf Coast. Number one. Thank you.
Thank you.
The number one grocery store
In Mississippi, Alabama,
Louisiana. 1 million customers a week can't be wrong. Welcome to Rouse's.
Welcome back to Bayou Time News. I'm your host, Tanner McGee. Today we have a very special guest, Parish President Jason Bergeron. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you on.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And we're kind of continuing some coverage about Hurricane Ida, where we are 3 years after the fact. And you're the perfect guest to come and talk about it. I know you're 8 months into the new job, but recovery is a big part of what this parish is going to be doing for the next 4 years.
Yeah, and it is. And, you know, going right after the storm, even though I wasn't doing a job like this, definitely involved in a lot of hurricane recovery. Especially through the Hatch grant, you know, especially 6 months after the storm, it was pretty much what we did. It felt like 50 to 75% of the time. So seeing what happened and the devastation and the need right away, moving around the parish, you know, seeing us come back every day. It's an everyday process. Like you said, probably another 4 years, but making a lot of progress. There's still a lot left to do.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the things we saw after the storm was people living in trailers and kind of temporary stuff. Do we have an idea of how many people are still living in travel trailers? What's the inventory right now?
Yeah, so it's two programs, state and federal. The difference I like to say is the federal program's the traditional mobile home, state programs, the trailers with the wheels. So we're at 372 on the federal program, with them talking about that program ending in February of 25. And then we're right around 27 on the state program. And every day it's a conversation about moving people from the state program to the federal program. And then from there, moving them back to the regular homes through, you know, LA Restore, things, Louisiana Housing Corporation, a few different opportunities to get people back in their homes.
Absolutely. I mean, it's never designed to be a permanent solution to housing in the parish, is to have this temporary travel trailers everywhere else. So the sooner the better. I mean, 3 years is still a long time to be living in a temporary solution.
Especially with like hurricane season right now, you know. So, you know, I know we're working these things, you know, for those who may or may not know, we have a housing coordinator, director for the parish that deals with housing and human services. It's a case management concept. It's case by case basis to understand what's lacking from moving those from the FEMA program, from the state program to the FEMA program. And then there's that percentage of people that want to stay where they're at. And so trying to get them to do that, but also the opportunity for people to move back that were living in situations like Bayou Towers or Senator Circle.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, it's a strain on all the resources in the parish when everything is so temporary. I mean, it's really not the way a city's designed to be, or our parish is designed to be. And so it's not normal. And that brings me to my next question is, what's next for hurricane recovery?
So we're continuing to work through, and you call about the load, you know, we've processed about 21,000 permits. And we're doing a lot of LA Restore stuff now. And with the extra load that's brought, we're actually able to get a person with the LA Restore into a permanent office and help us process that stuff. So we're in conversations, you know, we're working on rebuilding the power plant. We're doing a lot of repairs, government towers, first and second floor, hopefully be done end of October, so that we'll be able to move some people back into the tower. But yeah, we got some projects like the fire station on the east side that hadn't been started yet. You see some buildings that still need to be torn down. A lot of those buildings are going through that 50% conversation with FEMA. So FEMA's going to look at it. You know, the part I guess that people may have trouble understanding is you go through the insurance process first. The parish had to sue its insurance company. You know, on all the buildings we had $65 million worth of coverage. The power plant alone is $170 million. And so we were able to get that $65 million addressed. And then from there, everything's working with FEMA, but they go through and try to understand, is it more than 50% damage? And if it's more than 50% damage, it becomes more of replacement versus repair, and having those conversations. And that's why you see some buildings that are still up that need to be torn down, because FEMA's saying, if you tear it down, we can't do the full assessment. And I don't think it's a fact of really going through the assessment on that building, but going through the list of all the buildings they have to assess.
Yeah, and you call it a conversation, but it's not as quick and easy as Jason picks up the phone and says, hey, FEMA director, this is what's going on. This is submitting documents. This is an application. and waiting months on a response, and then finding out they want more documents they didn't ask for the first time.
Yeah.
So it's a unique bureaucracy of unique bureaucracy.
That's a great way to put it. And that's some of the conversations I've had, being in government, is that I say government gets that black eye, but it's probably more that bureaucracy of part of government that is the bad part of it.
Yeah, and every time something doesn't go right and they give money to somebody who doesn't deserve it, they create a bureaucracy to prevent it from happening, which actually just slows the process up even further, because then it becomes about not wasting a dollar, but we're going to spend millions in the bureaucracy to not waste that $1.
Right. And it's the good stuff for the bad. And part of the conversation I had, and I've continually had since I've been elected, is that, by this time you should look at, and FEMA's trying to make sure they're solvent. But when you look at, we've had storms hit, certain categories should average a certain amount of money. What can we do to make that money roll faster? And then you look at just recently, Katrina, FEMA going back to them and saying, you need to send money back to us because you didn't follow this and do that right. And I think that creates that fear that you got to make sure you have that approval. And if you start work before, they don't give you the money at all. Like you can't do one thing and then they give you the money, and then you get started with engineering and really getting into the down and dirty of projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I'm sure y'all are seeing now is, you touched on it, which is the permitting process locally within your own office. You have a normal staff, but something like IDA causes a huge workload just on something like demoing properties, which seems straightforward. But when you got a bunch of potentially hazardous materials, you got stuff you have to check to make sure that property can be demoed.
Yeah, and right now we're still 3 times the average of what we were before IDA on a daily basis. And so part of that process is at a certain point FEMA was demoing or paying for the debris. And so now we've worked into a different pot of money. And then you look at that's on homes. Then we start having a conversation about derelict vessels. We have over 900 vessels, but we still have to go through the permit process through the Corps and the Coast Guard to get the permits needed to remove derelict vessels. Yeah.
People wonder why it takes so slow these days, but it's not like the good old days where you could just hook up the stuff to trailers and start pulling them out of the water like you probably could have got away with in 1945. This is
right.
It's a different era, and we worry about a whole host of things. And that's all the time we have on this issue. But we back talk more IDA recovery with Parish President Jason Bergeron, and I'll see you in just a few minutes.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by South Louisiana Bank. It's better when we bank together. Waits and Downer, attorneys at law. Terrebonne Ford, built Ford tough.
Welcome back to Bayou News. I'm your host, Tanner McGee. We're back with Parish President Jason Bergeron, and we're talking about Hurricane Ida, where we are 3 years after. And so, I'm asked the question that's on everybody's mind in this parish is insurance. What are we doing? What does it look like? Give us a state of the insurance in the parish address.
So you can divide that conversation into 2. One is the homeowners. The legislature passed 26 laws that are supposed to make it a better market and provide other opportunities. Then you start getting into more of the flood insurance conversation, which is really, I feel the parish has more impact. We were involved in a lawsuit with FEMA where on the risk rating 2.0, that's kind of going back and forth and trying to see where that's going to go. And then on top of that, we're doing what's called a CLOMR, which is a conditional letter of map removal. And that's basically taking the parish, divided it into grids, take the grids that the population's tied to, and submitting the data, because FEMA does flood maps every 10 years. And the latest data they have is since 2018. So what we're looking to make sure is they have the data since 2018 so that we can make sure the pumps and the levees and all the flood control, water control structures are included in the process. Because when you look at one point, with Rita in that time frame, we flooded 11,000 homes. And then when we had Barry, we only flooded 11. And so we know the work we've done, that we've taxed ourselves to build. The Corps finally getting involved. And so as we go through that process, we're looking at, here's the data, let's get it added in. But then kind of going back and forth with FEMA with that process, you're probably talking about the parish spending $500,000, and it could take a year or two and nothing change. And so we're actually hopefully getting ready to have a call with FEMA shortly that got lined up here. Hopefully it's going to happen next week as we understand it, to really just have that conversation, because we hadn't been able to sit in front of anybody and say, you know, this is everything we're doing. We're trying to lower these rates. This has to count. And we're going to make that conversation happen. And on top of that, the next conversation with our insurance commissioner is getting the underwriters down here to stand and touch on the things that we have added so they can see the difference. And from there, you know, unfortunately, it's not a short process, but we're definitely doing everything we can to lower those rates. And if there's something we could do to get somebody certified, because they have a CRS score, and that score determines also what your insurance rates are. So every box we can check, we're doing it, and then doing it as quickly as we can and working on lowering those rates.
Absolutely. No, it's the topic I hear the most out of anything is that we're getting priced out of the insurance market, or priced out of our homes based off the insurance market, both flood and property. It's definitely something I think is the biggest challenge as a community we're going to be seeing for the next 4 years. You know, and then the other side of this is, you know, I think people don't realize that after you have a major storm event, like for example, Katrina, the state received a whole bunch of money in sales tax collections because people were buying things related to recovery. You know, they're going to Lowe's every weekend. There's a whole host of stuff, so it pops everything up. And then what happens about a year or 2 and 3 years after is those revenues start normalizing. And that's really what led to the 8 years ago, the collapse of the state government was that one issue alone really drove everything to where it was. We're spending under the post-Katrina economy didn't match up with the reality of what the normal base was. I say all that as a long explanation. We're kind of hitting that point right now in the parish. I would assume. I'm not looking at the numbers, but that's...
Yeah, I mean, you know, the sales tax are definitely down. And when I start looking at that conversation and where we are, you know, I call them false economies. We had Katrina. We had, you know, Gustav Ike. You had the BP oil spill. You had COVID. You had Ida. And it's interesting because it always seems that when the rest of the country is going through recession, we end up with this false economy. And so sales tax are down post Ida. But if you look at the track over the last 10 years, because I like to look at things like the downturn we had in oil and gas, really heavily 2014 to 2017 and tapering off. And if you look at that last 10-year period, where it was trending up versus where we're coming down now is about where we would end up. And, you know, with that disaster and the false economy, you know, we're looking at having $117 million come from the state through OCD. And with that, I think it's going to inject some money into our economy. It's probably another, 6, 8 months, maybe 10 months out. Some of that stuff's not going to affect sales taxes because it's government work, government projects. But we're going to have things like small business grants and our business incubator and wastewater and stormwater studies to really make sure we identify the needs that our residents need.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're going to see those projects, even though it may not be a resident going buying something, it's people coming into the parish and doing work. That's going to stay at the hotel room if they're from out of town. That's going to buy a meal at Chili's if they're out of town. I mean, it does have indirect impact into your overall coffers. And I agree, it's a great point. And when do you see those projects really taking off?
So we were going through the process. We had our first allocation submitted January 8th. I mean, I wasn't even barely a week in office. Work, putting that stuff together. It's about 26 projects. The second allocation was submitted in March. From there, they decided instead of we were answering questions, they said, look, just get all the applications of your projects together. The plans were basically approved, and we're working on having those submitted by November 30th, but we've already started submitting them. So as I look at how questions come back and how long money takes, I'm hoping we start getting some of that funding by the end of the year. But I think it's going to be really going into that, summer time frame, maybe a little bit after that everything gets approved and funded, and unless that changes. But, I think it's an opportunity. It's for us to take that next step of recovery and rebuilding.
And what kind of projects are we talking about at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I talked about small business grants, storm and wastewater. I mean, a lot of things. So it's low to moderate income, and it's got to either have a resiliency conversation or economic development impact. And so, I mean, everything, some pump related projects. I mean, you just go down the line of everything you can imagine. And like I said, 26 projects. If you go to tpcg.org/recovery, you can actually see these list of projects.
Absolutely. That's great information to put out on the website because people are interested in knowing how the money's going to be used. It's good to know it's on the website and available to the public to download. Unfortunately, we could talk this for a couple more hours, but we're out of time. It was great having you on. Thank you for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
I'm your host, Tanner McGee, with Parish President Jason Bergeron, talking to Ida Recovery. See you next time.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality.